webinar is something that's of great interest to a lot of us. This is about capacity building within grants offices at universities and research institutions. And we're really fortunate to have some amazing panelists here with us today. They're colleagues from Europe who are here to join us today. A very warm welcome to Eva, Daniela, and Stephanie. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I think first off, I'm just going to request each one of you to introduce yourselves. Just tell us a little bit about your career path and where you are right now and what your role is about. Maybe over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting us today to begin with. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Eva Björndal. I'm the head of Post Award at King's College London. I'm originally from Sweden. I moved to the UK 3 years ago, so I've been at King's for 3 years. And before that, I was at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. The Karolinska Institute is a medical university known for awarding the Nobel Prize in Medicine. I was there for almost 15 years. And when I started at Karolinska, we were only a few people. When I left 15 years later, we were like 15 people in pre-award and 20 in post-award. So I really went through the process of expanding the grants office. And just, before I came to Karolinska, I worked at the European Commission in Brussels, but that almost feels like another lifetime. So I think that's, I think I hand over to Daniela.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Savita, for inviting us today for this presentation. It's really an honor, and I'm really looking forward to the interaction later on with all the attendants. Just as an introduction of myself, my name is Daniela Amadio. I work at King's College London together with Eva, but I'm the head of pre-award. So I'm responsible for the whole office that looks after the application life cycle until project start. I'm Italian originally. I've come to the UK, to King's College London 10 years ago in the pre-award office, but I had started my career around Europe, working at the beginning in non-governmental organizations as bid writer. And then I have done a stage at the European Commission, working on the framework funding program of the European Commission, and then moved around again, still in pre-award roles until I landed at King's, where I had recently taken on the whole pre-award office and have restructured it in a certain way that I will talk about later. And I hand over to Stephanie. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Savita, for the introduction. It's a very big honor to be here to speak to you all today. So my name is Stephanie Fogel. I work at the University of Vienna as an EU program manager. I am originally from the UK and moved to Austria 5 years ago for this role. I did already live in Austria before this time as well. So I started my career in a private consultancy company where I was writing project applications. So I was working in the bid writing area, business development, and some project management once we got the grants awarded. Following this, I moved back to the UK and worked for a non-profit organisation doing pre and post-award management. So similar work, writing proposals and then managing the proposals that were awarded. And then, 5 years ago, I came back to Vienna to work at the University of Vienna as in this role as the EU program manager, which was very much pre-award. So it was very much offering support with application writing, information on different funding schemes and so on for our researchers. And then I've transitioned in this role into post-award and introduced a project management service to the University of Vienna, and I will talk about that later in my presentation.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I really look forward to all of your presentations.
Good. So should I go ahead then and share my
Sure.
screen. Yes. So can you let me know if you can see it?
Yes.
Yep, good. Yep, I don't see anyone, so it's good that you told me. So we're going to talk today about capacity building within grants offices at universities and research institutions. And what I really should have added when I did my introduction too was that when I was at Karolinska Institute, I was very fortunate to be involved in 2 EU-funded projects that were aimed at capacity building, one in Africa and one in Asia. And one of the work packages, and the work package I was responsible for, was the capacity building of grants offices. So I had the opportunity to travel to our partner institutions, and we had a wonderful collaboration and exchange in terms of grants office capacity building. And so I will very much of what I talk about today will be a mix of what I experienced when working at Karolinska, building up that office, but also supporting partners in Africa and Asia through those 2 projects. And just as a little interesting fact, the PI for those 2 projects actually is an Indian born professor at Karolinska Institute. His name is Professor Vinod Divan. He's been instrumental in building in the grants office support at the Karolinska. So I'm going to just jump into my first slide. And of course, external research funding. We know that, the majority, if not all, research universities and research institutions are dependent on external funding. But really the big questions are from where and how. And one thing that I can say, and I know Daniela and Stephanie could say too, is that with certainty is that an institution can maximize its external funding through building a grants office. And now for some reason my mouse does not work. Oh, there it goes. Yeah. So building a grants office is really about supporting researchers and research. And with this slide, I just wanted to make you aware of that a grants office can be called many different things. The most common terminology used is grants office, research support office or research office, research services, office of sponsored programs, but you might come across some other names too. And it's really depending too on, on the institution, where they're based and how they're structured sometimes. I'm very sorry about that, but I do have a delay in when I click my mouse to change slide. So please bear with me then. So going through, I'm going to go through, I should say, what I consider the groundwork and development work based on my experience. But I wanted to take the opportunity to say this is just really one example. There is not one way to do this. It's so much depending on your institution, on where in the world you are, and many factors. So I'm just humble in the sense saying that what I'm going to share with you today is not the one way. It's just one of many. But we are going to go through some of the groundworks that needs to be done when building a grants office and some of the development work from my perspective. So it is hard to start from the beginning. And before even, starting the journey, I recommend that you do clarify the involvement and support of the university deans and the presidents, because they're really, your survival, I say, is dependent on it. Mainly because it takes time sometimes to set up the grants office, and you can be questioned in different ways. So that support, to have that support in your back, it's absolutely vital. The second thing I would say is to really look at your institution and identify the areas of strength, to know what to begin to focus on, and link those with opportunities, of course. Then I would also identify which researchers that already have existing international collaborations and existing international grants. And when you've done this, of course, you really have done a mapping exercise, and you have a good starting point for for the possibilities of your areas of strengths and so forth. It's also important to look into what your current grant status is. What grants do you have already, and from which funders? Because you might see that you are covering some funders fairly well, but you might have to look into then, it could be good, beneficial to the institution to start to look into other funders. So this is just all really groundwork that I recommend. And then benchmark yourself with your peer universities and research institutes, and benchmark yourself with of course the ones that are approximately the same ranking, but also the ones that are higher ranked, because what are they doing that you are not potentially not doing? And then develop and set targets based on the information that you gathered. This is all really, again, like I said, it's a mapping exercise to see, to see where you are in the big scheme of funding. Then, of course, you need to have a certain budget. You need to obtain a budget. I know from the experience with those two projects in Asia and Africa that to start a grants office, some of those budgets that they have initially, they were project-based, and that will potentially make it difficult later on when the project is ending, because you need to have some sustainable funding. But at least at this point, at the very beginning, you need to get whatever budget you can get, and from whatever source you can get, so you could start to plan building the office. And then the work should really start on building a policy statement and develop and distribute that, and employ an interim manager to drive it forward, because there's a lot of work involved in the at the very beginning. So, and a good question to ask yourself too is where in the organization the grants office could sit or should sit. So I would say it's very much dependent on your organization and the size of your organization. What we did at Karolinska was that we started it centrally, and I do see that that's quite common, so you can consider having a central based grants office. You could consider having a faculty or department based grants office, or actually a mix of both. What I think is important to consider is that where do you have the critical mass? Like where do you have enough so you have a critical mass to sustainably work forward? And I also found, and this is again, it's just only from personal experiences, but the pros with the central office is that you have staff fully dedicated at working for the grants office. What I found sometimes in the faculty or department-based ones, that they normally have a mixture of tasks, not always all necessarily related to grants office, and you lose a little bit of focus there. I would say many of the big universities, and especially in the US, they have a mix of both, central administration and then also faculty based. But again, depending on your size of your institution and so forth. One thing too to consider is that if you're at faculty or department level, you're one step further away from senior leadership at the university level. So again, there's no rights or wrongs. There is, it should all be tailor-made to your institution, basically. And another basic question to ask before embarking upon this is what what services you should offer. And again, it's so different from across the world or around the world. The research support offices, the grants offices, they're set up so very, very differently, and there's no right or wrong. But what the grants office could potentially offer is research development, pre-award contracts, innovation support, tech transfer support, legal support, career development, post-award research credit control. And again, just based on my own experience at Karolinska, for example, we had pre-award and research development was all pre-award. At KCL, those are two different units. And at Karolinska, we had, for example, career development was part of office for a while. We were third person that was hired to the grants office at the very beginning was legal counsel. We had legal support for a number of years, and then that specific resource moved into the central legal unit. So there are all different ways to do it, of course, and it's just to consider, of course, what works for you. And some more examples of what the grants offer, more specific ones in terms of not only main services, but examples of task or information that the grants office could offer is information on grants available. Grants office can assist with contacts abroad. They could develop new international research contacts. Can assist with proposal writing, with budgeting, with financial reporting and audits, training and seminars, so training on what grants are available, how to write applications, budgeting, and so forth. Support with legal aspects, collaboration agreements, consortium agreements, contracts, and so forth. Of course, this determines what areas of competence you do want to recruit for. For science and application writing, we had two, when we started at Karolinska, there were two people with PhDs in medicine who helped really with the science writing. You might consider also, if you want to do post-award or budgeting, to have someone with a financial background. Economy, intellectual property or patent, knowledge, legal knowledge, administration in general, and credit control, if that's going to be part of your post award, for example. This is moving on to the next slide. This is just an example of, this is the project life cycle from the beginning to the end. So you start with finding the funding and application, and the application phase, negotiation, signature, grant setup, award management, and audits. What I would say, or what I would recommend, of course, is that as a very first priority when building a grants office is to start with the red and the orange, finding funding and support with applications. You need to get the money in to begin with before potentially consider how to organize the next steps. But of course, this doesn't mean that you should start to plan for the other parts of a project life cycle. You're planning to be successful, obviously, and then you need to start to think about how do we do when it comes to negotiations of agreements or contracts, and who signs what and what happens next, when we have gotten the money. But again, I think it's a very natural, and this is what I've seen, and from the projects I participated in too, was that you really start at getting the money in, and then move on to the long-term planning. So then really the next steps, and I've already touched upon this, but sustainable funding. You might be project funded at first, but what happens then? What happens after 2 years when the project has ended? Of course, your success is depending on that you develop a long-term budget and can justify it. And it goes a little bit hand in hand too. When you're successful, it's easier to receive sustained funding, maybe potentially then from the university overheads. After that too, it's important to think about to obtain a space, premises and equipment, and really thinking where we're best located so we can meet the researchers easily. They could come to us or we could come to them. It's all about being able to provide the service that they want and being, making yourself available for that. And especially so important to be flexible in the beginning. So if they say, can you come to us, then you come. Yeah, that's just a tip. Of course, to create an office manning plan, and that's depending on, again, what you decide to offer at the beginning, but you need to develop personnel profiles and advertise for those, and it always takes time to do that. And what training does the staff need that you do recruit, or what training do you need yourself if you're leading the office? So there's a lot of external courses available. You could do site visits, exchange programs, or exchange visits with another institution. There might also be internal training needed on procedures and processes within your institution. Another thing, and this is a huge tip, it's probably one of the most important tips, I would say, is to network, formal and informal. And I cannot say it enough that, again, speaking from my own experience, but when you establish networks and contacts with other universities, you could, for example, join a research administration official networks that we have, or groups, or informal groups, or just connect with your peer universities or institutions in the same city. But what we did, we really did that, and we did that especially when it came to US funding. We joined the US Research Administrator Network in Cura, and got so much information from our peers. They were just sharing their processes, their guidelines, their templates, which meant that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel again. So that saved us really a lot of time, money ultimately, but also to be able to have someone to call when you have a question about something. So really, networking is so important. I cannot say that enough. Next steps. Well, you got the basics now, and then it's recommended that you consider what delegations are needed. It's also the time to think about internal grants handling process. How are you actually going to do it, and share that. So that it's clear who's responsible for what and when and so forth. Create a database if you don't have a system covering that already. You do want to measure your success. That would be your trump card when it's time to ask for resources. So it's really important to do that from the very beginning. And it's important too or you should consider at least signing up to the different databases that are available, Research Professional being one of them. That it's a database that basically of funding opportunities that they make the funding opportunities available to you, very easy to use. And again, that's something that we did at Karolinska, and we did that for our US funding, which we almost doubled within a couple of years after having signed up to Research Professionals. You then, of course, it's important to identify grant opportunities and market yourself and upcoming opportunities that there are through newsletters, information workshops, targeted emails, websites, what have you. But it's not just enough to identify them, but I think it's important to be proactive in this, spreading spreading the information and the knowledge that you are building. So just a quick slide on the difference between universities and research institutions. There are, of course, differences between those in terms of setting up. And one of them, for example, could be the focus or the scope. If you're a research institute focused on cancer, you have a more focused scope and a more limited, you could say, too, compared to a university that is got multi-faculty university that's got coverage, a very large coverage. I see that again, the difference between King's and Karolinska. Karolinska had one faculty, the Faculty of Medicine, and was very focused. The volume can be different, but not necessarily, and that's again a thing I see between Karolinska and King's. Karolinska had in research revenue more. Research revenue was higher than at King's, who is a multi-faculty university, but it could also work the other way around, that the volume could be smaller because you're so specialized and focused. The decision-making processes and structure within a research institute is most likely different than a multi-faculty university. So those are just things to consider. And my last slide is on some of the challenges that I saw when working with the projects in Africa and Asia. And one of them was the general acceptance. It's a new unit, the Grants Office. They struggled to getting it accepted as a legit office. Many of the researchers did not understand the benefit of it. It can be challenging sometimes. Managing expectations, it takes time. It takes time to build a grants office. First you're going to support and find the funding opportunities, and then support them with the application, and then it's going to go through an evaluation process, and then it takes time. That's just it. And you might have a year or two where you don't bring in that much money. And it's also managing expectations in terms of your services. It's the researcher can't come the last day and expect you to do miracles, and there sometimes what those partners in Africa and Asia found out there were too many expectations too quickly on the grants office. As I said in the beginning, leadership support is so important, can be, make it or break it, basically. So it's important to have that, and that can be challenging, and it was challenging for them. It was much easier at Karolinska in that way because we had that support. And we have already discussed the sustainable funding, but also the competence building for staff and for researchers, but especially for staff, because if you train them, they become very attractive on the job market. So it's a challenge to retain qualified staff. And academic engagement. One tip there is to get someone, a promoter of your services. So someone who you help to be successful, to kind of be the one, to be an academic voice for your success. And lastly, actually get the researcher to accept that grant writing is different from scientific writing. And that is really a question of trust, and it can take some time too. But again, your success will show it, but you need to get there too, of course. So now I'm going to hand over to Daniela first, and then Stephanie, who are going to give two examples of how a pre-award office and a post-award office can look like, and how they can develop. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. Savita, I
So
see that there are some questions. Shall we address them maybe later after the presentation? Yeah,
we'll do. Yes, we'll take up the questions later. So we just request all the participants to keep putting your questions into the chat box, and we'll take them up later. Thank you, Daniela.
Thanks to you. So let me share. Okay, so I cannot see you, but unless I hear any screams, I assume that you can see my slides. Okay, so Eva has done a very good introduction into Grant Support Office. And now what I'm going to focus is on basically applying, getting the money in, and make sure that we start, let's say, the life cycle of the process of the project. So my presentation will focus on pre-award, the pre-award services in the Grants Office. And I just wanted to define pre-award services because interpretation of pre-award in different institutions, in different contexts, could be different. And in my experience, so that we put it in a framework, pre-award really means any support that we give to researchers from when they have a research idea and they find the funding opportunity, until the proposal is submitted, the proposal is awarded by the funder, we sign the contracts with the funder and the collaborators, and the project basically starts. We could expand pre-award even to stages earlier than finding basically the funding opportunity. So we could look into pre-award offering services for the development of researchers, for building connections for researchers, and so on and so forth. And it could expand pre-award until basically the whole life cycle of the project, until the project ends, in supporting with contractual changes, with amendment, extension, and so on and so forth. So it's a very broad area, and it's a very broad range of services. When I started at King's many years ago, this was the setup. King's is a multi-faculty university, and we are located in 3 different parts of the city in London. And there were 3 independent, let's say, pre-award units in these 3 different campuses. There was a central unit that was handling only European funding, which is where I started. And the services that were offered were different between all these units. So, for example, I was doing the non-technical writing of EU proposals, and someone asked in the chat before. So I was helping actually academics developing the research proposal in a way that would address the funders' expectations. But this service was not offered, for example, by the other pre-award offices. So the type of service was somehow patchy, and also the type of knowledge and information and level across all the pre-award offices was different. Something we had in common, all of us, that we were all funders experts. We would all develop budget and costing for the projects. We would all be responsible for submitting applications on the various portals of the funders, so we would be system experts for the funders. We would all draft and negotiate research contracts, sign off of awards, and we would all be involved at different stages when the project was up and running in handling amendments, supplements, renewals, and so on and so forth, which is what I call award management. But the level of this service and this competence was different across the board, across all the teams. So what happened in the last few years? We were really under a series of pressures from the external world, let's say, and internal pressures. So there were a lot of changes that really led us through a path of drastic change in terms of the Grants Office. So if we look externally at political level, as you may know, the UK has left the European Union. We were, and this had an impact, of course, on our capacity of collaborating with European partners and in attracting European Union funding. We have been regularly audited by funders, and they had started also auditing pre-award services, so auditing the Grants Support Office at pre-award side. So we had all the results and recommendations from these audits. As you know, funders keep on changing the terms and conditions, and In the UK, I'm not sure how the situation is in the Indian context, but in the UK, there is a lot of competition among universities and research centers in terms of the international rankings and making sure that we are at worldwide competing level. So all these external forces has put some pressure internally in terms of developing an institutional research strategy. The faculties have gone through internal restructures. We have purchased a new research management system that would enable a more streamlined grants management approach. Just to give you an example, when I started King's, we had different way of filing documents. We would use spreadsheet for the budgets. We would have a separate database for the data. We would use a different system for the financial reporting. So there were bits and pieces all over the places, basically. And now with the new research management system, we have all integrated just in one place. And we have increased also our ambition in terms of increasing the number of applications and getting involved in bigger and more complicated King's-led projects. So all of this really made us realize that we needed to upgrade the grant support office in terms of making sure that the services offered by all the team members in the pre-award office were streamlined, were of the same level, but were also at top level in terms of information, knowledge, and training. We wanted to make sure that if we want to attract and retain a worldwide competing, let's say, academic and researcher population, we need also to be able to offer top level grant support office. So we needed to increase and do better in terms of the grant support office. And we needed also to offer opportunities for career development for the people who were working in our office and have been so reliable all over the years. And there was a lot of room for them to really develop to the next level. This is something that Eva has talked about before, so I'll just go through it maybe a bit quickly. But when we talk about opportunities for staff development, for career opportunities for people working in grant support office, we could really go into very specialized niche of expertise. So as I said, at the beginning of my career, I was working on proposal development and bid writing. Now I'm not doing it anymore because I've specialized in another area, let's say, of pre-award. But this is something really important for researchers, be able to offer an extra pair of eyes, an extra pair of fresh ideas, someone who could peer review the proposal. It's really important. Equally, it's important to be able to act as an institutional representative who could build the research connections with other institutions or even just with funders. So taking part in the dialogue with funders in terms of, I don't want to say lobbying, but influencing funders to develop opportunities that would meet, let's say, the expertise of your researchers is really important. You need to be able to be experts in the constantly changing funding landscapes. So where to find opportunities, how to apply, how to meet funders' expectations, and also be able to pass on all this knowledge to the researchers. So making sure that you have the opportunity and the system to train and develop the researcher staff and the academic staff. Because as Eva said, grant writing is different from academic writing, and it takes specific skills, and our researchers need to be able to understand and learn how to do it. Data is very important. Some of the questions that came in before, but even now, really show the importance of data. And when I talk about data, is the ability to collect the right information that you need in order to show and highlight your successes, your the benefits, the impact of your job, but also in terms of understanding where are the strengths and the weaknesses of your institution, what needs to be done better, and how things could improve. And without the relevant data, it's very, very difficult to be really effective. So data and system is an area of development that is becoming stronger and stronger, at least as far as I can see in the higher education sector. You need to have, of course, experts in contracts, in research agreements, and in the UK, again, it's becoming more of a trend to have specific experts who work on compliance. So when we talk about compliance, we mean compliance with funders' terms and conditions, but also with legislation, with institutional policies on various aspects of the research project. So procurement, data, governance, ethics, and bullying and harassment, because this is what funders are asking more and more. And in fact, in our office, we have developed a role just around compliance for this purpose. You could also develop as a project manager in terms of career paths, but I'm gonna leave that to Stephanie because she's gonna talk specifically about project management in post-award. So how I have developed the grants office, if you remember, as I said before, there were 4 different teams. They were working not in a streamlined and uniform way. So I went through a series of discussions with academics and the faculties to really understand and ask, what do you need from a grants office? What are the things that are working well? Where are the weaknesses and how can we help you? And we have designed, we've gone through an exercise where we have defined and designed the roles and responsibility between the grants office, sitting centrally, and people working in departments and faculties and PIs. So we really identified, okay, pre-award is responsible for this thing, but the PI has to do this other thing, and the people in the department are responsible for these things, so that it's clear who does what and when. With that business case, then I went to senior management for approval, and I used data in order to argue for a return investment and to show the impact. And then from there, I went through HR and the whole restructure and recruitment of roles and so on and so forth. So after the restructure, we built a central office of 20 people. Now the service covered here are streamlined and are exactly the same across the whole team. So we are the expert in funders and calls. We don't do budget anymore as such, but we check the budgets that are developed by academics and departments. So we do the quality control of budget. We're still the system experts. We draft and negotiate contracts. We sign off the awards. We're still responsible for amendments, supplements, renewals while the project is ongoing. We do project management for King's-led awards. And as I said before about compliance and due diligence, this is a new role that we have developed. So we have someone who really is responsible for compliance. And we have also a new role on policy, someone who is dedicated to get involved in the policy dialogue with funders. What is new? So we have more staff. We have created, as I said, expert post. We have, yes, a system for managing the grant pipeline with integrated communication. So we say that something that is really new, it's a very much more efficient communication with academics and departments. And we have defined the roles and responsibilities. So when an academic wants to go and apply for a funding call, this is in very broad highlight how the pre-award application support works. So we have the academic at the center of the diagram, and the PI will work with pre-award, research strategy, and departments in order to build and develop the application, the budget, and everything. The Research Strategy Office is now the expert unit that is responsible for bid writing, mock interviews, peer reviews, and so on and so forth. So they really focus in supporting, let's say, the scientific development of the proposal. The departments, together with the PI, will develop the budget, and then the pre-award office, we somehow channel through into the application all aspects that are relevant from other units or departments within the institution. So we are the one that maybe liaise with procurement and finance, with ethics, with the tech transfer, with the clinical trials office if it's relevant. We're the one liaising with external collaborators and the funders, and so on and so forth, in order to support the non-technical side of an application. In a very broad nutshell, this is how we work. And in my experience, if I think what is important to consider when we offer pre-award services in the grants office, I think the way I've seen this profession growing is that it could be a very generalist task, but it could also become very specialist. And I talked before about all these different specialist area of development that this profession could develop into. Eva has mentioned it, and I will mention it again, because a lot of the ideas that I've brought into my work have not come out of because I'm a genius, but they have really come out of learning and listening and talking with other institutions, and other peers. So even events like today are really, really important, because there is so much information that I can learn and I can bring into my profession that has really helped me get to my stage today. So participate in networks, do exchanges with other universities. I have gone into exchange to other institutions, and we have hosted here at King's a lot of peers that wanted to come to King's and learn and just discuss how we do things, and it's been so valuable. It's super important to be in dialogue with funders and collaborators. I mean, once you have a step closer to the funders, you have more opportunities to be successful, and this is something that you can really sell to also to your researchers. And it's important that your services as a pre-award grant support office meet the needs of the researchers. So ask the researchers, what do you need? If you struggle for researchers to appreciate or use your services, maybe think about maybe asking them, what is it that you really need? Do you need help with funding a funding call, or do you need help with application? And then like this, you can start building your reputation. And once you have a high reputation, you know, it will just be a matter of people keep on referring to you and using your services. And of course, we need to remember that different types of researchers need different support. So the support for, of course, early career researchers and young researchers is different from big professors. And so that shapes and also defines somehow the grants office. And there was a question that came in, I think, around the fact that around overhead return and funders that pay less and less, how do you make strategic decisions? So the institution will have objectives in terms of research revenue, in terms of overhead revenue, but of course academics and researchers would have their own objectives in terms of what money they need and where to go and get it. So somehow we have to struggle, and we have to strike a balance between supporting an academic who wants to apply maybe to a very small grant that doesn't pay overheads and so on and so forth, which for the institution might look like a loss, but actually for that research is a very important step. So you always have to find this balance and be aware of this tension, if you can say this way. And it's very important to learn from success, from failures, and also from the others. Just as a last bit of curiosity, it's not really about pre-award, but curiosity, I just wanted to show you that I found some data, talking about the importance of data, in the Horizon 2020 dashboard, where it comes out that India is the 10th largest collaboration partner for the UK. We have 17 Marie Sklodowska-Curie action together and 6 ERC projects. And actually King's is now in the process of adding the Institute for Financial Management and Research in India as one of our beneficiary to a live project. So this is an example of a collaboration, of a successful collaboration. This is it for my side in pre-award, and I'm gonna now hand over to Stephanie for the post-award section. Just let me end slideshow. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Daniela. So yes, as previously mentioned, I will present the post-award part of this presentation. So just wanted to start with a definition of post-award. What do we mean by this when we talk about it? So this, as has been mentioned by Eva, can be very different depending on which organisation you're part of. But there's a somewhat consensus about some of these points. For example, once the funding has already been awarded and the contracts have already been signed, then it will be classed as post-award. Once the researcher is at the implementation stage, or you know, once the research is already ongoing, this would be classed as post-award. And we at the University of Vienna see post-award as lasting until the project is closed, but also that the audit period has passed, because this can last several years after the official close of the project. So the University of Vienna only had pre-award. As I mentioned in my introduction, we were just a pre-award office, and the post-award was introduced in the past 4 years, so it's still new. And so I would like to share my experience with how we developed that and how we implemented it. But I would like to start by showing first what we used to be like. So our grants office is officially called, so Eva mentioned at the beginning, lots of different names for the grants office. Ours is very long: Research Services and Career Development Service Unit. So we for short call it the Research Services. We are one of 14 centralised service units at the University of Vienna. So these centralised service units are all administration service units, finance, HR, room management, the IT department, the library. We support 20 faculties and centres at the university, so that accounts for just over 7,000 academic staff. And just as a comparison, we've got 3,000 non-academic staff. So that's the size of our administration. So within the grants office, there are approximately 32 full-time equivalent staff, very flexible working agreements in Austria. And so there's a lot of people who work not exactly full-time, they work part-time, or, you know, they can define their working hours. I work as part of the EU and international funding team, and here we have approximately 9 full-time staff. I will briefly go over each of these teams. So you can see we have a legal advice team, we have a monitoring and reporting team, technology transfer office, national funding and knowledge transfer, and also the Centre for Doctoral Studies and Career Development. These are all teams within the service unit of the Grants Office, or within the Grants Office, I should say. So let me just go over what I think even though I focus on post-award, this is still relevant to see what services we did offer and how we have grown from that. So I wanted to very briefly talk about the pre-award services. And this would be things like advice on national and international funding opportunities, advising on proposal development and budget preparation, developing our own externally funded applications so that we had our own projects to manage for our service unit, and also managing internal university programs. We do contract negotiation. So this is for consortium agreements, grant agreements, non-disclosure agreements. We offer career development support and skills training via workshops. These are mostly aimed at PhD students and postdocs, but we also do some for professors. Knowledge and technology transfer, so anything to do with intellectual property rights, patents, copyrights, spin-offs, all of these things. We'll have a dedicated office for that. We also are very involved in policy development internally at the University of Vienna, but also we are involved in networks, and on a national level we try to, or we are asked to provide comments on policies, for example, EU policies that then will get fed up to our Ministry of Education, then go up to the EU. So we get involved in quite a few in policy development. We are also the liaison between the faculties and centres and the rectorate. So if you need a signature, if you need an approval or something, then it goes through our office and we process it for the rectorate, provide all the information so that they can say, okay, yes, I understand this, and they can sign it off. We do monitoring and reporting on funding, and as Daniela mentioned, this data management and data quality is really important to show, you know, how many applications we've submitted, how much funding has come through, etc. And for this, we use a system, a UCRIS system. So it's a specific research management database. And so when we thought about post-award, we never defined our services. We were just the research services. It was never pre-award, post-award. And so all of these services you can think about, that I mentioned in the previous slide, a lot of them are also relevant for post-award. So we can look at contract negotiation. This is relevant for post-award. Career development, skills training, also relevant. You don't just get your first grant and then finish with your career development skills training. You need more. Knowledge and technology transfer, any creations during the project implementation. And of course, any liaison that needs to be, any signatures that need to be, or any changes to the project that need to be signed off needs to go via us as well. So this is what we would then start looking at as post-award as well. So when we talk about the grants office, and you know, we'll have a very, in some ideas, there's a very defined pre-award service and a very defined post-award service. Here we just had the general research services and we had it all together. But when we thought about the post-award, there was definitely one thing that was missing, and this was project management. So I would like to talk a little bit about that moving forward, and how we developed that and how we introduced it. So I think it's really important, first of all, to define what I mean by project management, because again, this can be different for every institution. For us, it was the idea of, once the project was being implemented, we take over the financial monitoring side of things. So we liaise with the finance department. We know very well the funder guidelines, so we can be responsible for the compliance and make sure that the costs are in line with what the funder requires. We can submit the financial reporting. We can work on amendments if the project needs to be changed. We are there for the audits. We prepare everything during the implementation of the project. We prepare everything in a way that when the auditor does come, it should be straightforward, because we've already got all of the answers. We prepare everything with that in mind. And we also offer training to research groups who want to increase their project management understanding, awareness, compliance, which is really useful because then the research groups can also have this expertise within as well. And the way that this project management service works is that we charge our time to the project that we work on. So as a project manager, I charge my salary to the project or to the project overheads, depending on how the budget is set up. So this was quite interesting to do the paid for service. I'll talk a little bit more about benchmarking in the next slide. Basically, I would say that the introduction of this service, of the project management services or post-award service, there was 3 main steps, and planning, endorsement and implementation. And it wasn't always linear. It didn't go from one to the other. It sometimes went back. We went to the planning phase, we went to get it endorsed by the head of the grants office, then there was some adjustments to be made, we went back to the planning phase and so on. So the first thing was identifying, first of all, the gap in the services, and this is when the benchmarking comes in. So this is when we did research. I did a lot of benchmarking through staff exchanges and through networks, for example, IRMI, which is the European Association for Research Managers and Administrators, and the Guild, which is a small, very small network for research-intensive universities that we're part of, and other collaborators that I was close with that I could talk to and ask how it works at their service, research service unit or grants office. So this was the first step, and this is why in the previous slide I said when we decided to do a paid for service, this was interesting because when I did the research, it seemed like this was not always the model that others had. So in some universities you would see, or research institutions, you would see that there was no post-award, no project management offered, and in others it was compulsory, they had to do it, and in some, like in our case, it is not compulsory, the researcher can take it or not. And this is why we had the paid for service, because the researcher can choose to take our services instead of having to hire their own project manager. You have it in-house. So talking about in-house, we have myself and another colleague who basically introduced this project management service, and we had previous experience with post-award management and we really enjoyed doing it. So we had these in-house skill sets which were not being used. And of course, by offering this service, we were contributing to the overall institutional strategy, which was to increase management support for researchers. So this was really important to align ourselves and really grab onto this and say, this is why we should do this. This is a real big advantage to introducing a service like this. And of course, when we take on the management, it reduces the risk of non-compliance because we understand the funders' guidelines and what is compliant. And previous to this service, the researchers were managing the grants themselves. So they would not only be responsible for carrying out all of the research, but they would also be responsible for making sure they understood the guidelines and did the financial reporting correctly. And of course, there was always the risk there that some costs were, you know, not eligible or whatever. There was some risks of non-compliance. And of course, it generated income with our business model side of things. We said we wanted to charge for this service. So the next step after planning it was to get the service endorsed. And in the University of Vienna and in Austria, it's a very hierarchical structure. So we had to get it endorsed through all steps of the university management, and that started with the head of the grants office. So that's the first step of management. And then he took it to the Vice Rector for Research and International Affairs, and then it had to be passed through the Rectorate, which is above him. So all of it goes step by step, and it's not as if I can have an idea, plan out the idea, and then take it to the very top. It has to, as I said, it's a very old hierarchy. It has to go through each step, which can be quite frustrating at times, but it's just the way that it has to be done. And in terms of the implementation of this post-award service, this project management that we wanted to implement, it was done, we told people through advertisements about this service, we told the researchers, and what was really important was that the rectorate, who is our university management, that they communicated it for us directly down to the faculties and centres and to the researchers, because it shows their endorsement and it builds trust with the researchers. We also had the faculties and centres themselves directly advertising this for us. And what was really useful was our grants office pre-award team. So I said before, we never categorized it as a pre and post award team, but here I mean the team who was not doing what we were doing with the project management. So it was all of the pre-award service offer that I mentioned in the previous slide, when they were doing the budgets and the proposal development with researchers, they could say, oh, by the way, do you know that we'll offer this service? You can budget it in and you can get a project manager to help you. And usually this was done with very large grants that would need a lot of support in the financial side of things. And I mentioned before that it was important for us that the researchers have a choice about taking the service, that it wasn't something that was forced upon them. And to be honest, there's only 2 of us who do the project management right now at a university of over 7,000 researchers. So it was not even possible that we implement this and say everybody has to do it, because we just don't have the staff to be able to do that. And over the years, so we really started planning this at the end of 2016 and beginning of 2017. So now we're in, near the end of 2021. And we just in the spring went through a strategy change. We were able to readjust ourselves. And this came with a lot of time. We had to have a good few years with the service to see what was working and see what wasn't. And this is, I think either Eva or Daniela mentioned this idea of being flexible. It's really important to readjust and to benchmark again, and to look at what your goals are and look at whether it's working or not. So what we did in the spring is we really defined more closely the type of projects, or more explicitly the type of projects that we did want to manage. And we realized that for some of them it was really the projects were too small and it was too much of a workload, or they didn't really need our help. And so we were able, after a few years in the cycle, we were able to really redefine what we wanted to do with this project management service. And so now, after the post-award service was introduced, this is the slide that I previously pointed out with how the research services is structured. And now you can see within our EU and international funding team, we have 7 people in the pre-award team and 2 people in the post-award team. And it was interesting to hear Daniela talk about the different careers and this idea of hiring someone just for compliance, because there's some aspects of that compliance job that we do in the post-award team as well. So I think even between our institutions, there's probably some change or some different tasks that project managers do in the University of Vienna versus in King's College. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit about the type of career, or how you could see yourself grow within this post-award service environment if this is where you wanted to go. And because we're still very much in this early phase that we introduced it a few years ago, and there's still only 2 of us, I can't say for sure how it's going to expand and what other career opportunities I see, apart from the career opportunity for me, which is being a project manager and managing these projects. What I can say is, from what I know from myself, my colleague, and other project managers or other post-award managers at different institutions that I've talked to, we're not usually from a purely financial background. We're not usually accountants. We're not usually someone who would work in a finance department. We are usually people who have some kind of understanding of the research sphere. And some of us have actually done research ourselves and have moved into research administration as a career because they wanted to leave academia, for example. So we come with quite a unique set of skills, and a lot of soft skills, such as very much so having the ability to really pay attention to the small details and be observant, and to communicate, because there's a lot of communication with the research groups and with the funders. And I think in terms of how this will grow and what other career opportunities might be in the future, it depends on how many projects are taking the service. So in our example, we can say that the more projects we get, the more project managers we're going to need. And because we charge our salary to those projects, we have an income, we have a steady income from those projects. I can imagine in different systems and in different infrastructures, it's quite hard to get that funding. But again, that's where the endorsement from the rectorate or from your university or institution management is really, really useful and very important. Because once you get more hires and more staff on the team, that's when you can expand. And it might lead to the situation where we split from the research services and we do actually identify a pre-award team and a very specific post-award team with management structures instead of being part of the same team. So I think I'm going to finish there. And I'm really interested to have conversations with some of you. I've seen some of the questions which are really interesting. I just wanted to let you know before I finish that actually today is my last day at the University of Vienna, and I will be moving to the Institute of Science and Technology Austria, otherwise known as IST Austria. So if you want to get in touch with me, I've given you my LinkedIn profile because you won't be able to reach my University of Vienna email address for much longer. So I'll still be working in post-award at the new organisation in a team that has been set up quite a few years ago. So it'll be really a different experience to see between the experiences and between the two institutions. So yeah, I think I'll hand back over to Savita now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daniela, Eva. That was an incredible journey through the entire world, I think, of a grants office, of developing new services, of restructuring services. And I'd just like to say that where we are in India today, there are a large number of institutions which are still at the stage of building something new, or creating something. But there are a couple of institutions who've had research offices for a couple of years. And it's really nice to see particularly Daniela and Stephanie's presentations where, you've been in a particular setup, you've realized that there were certain gaps, and through consultations with your academic community, with buy-in from the leadership, you've actually put in the effort to restructure your services and add value. And I think this is a message that needs to go out, that our research services cannot be static, that periodically we need to be assessing whether it's fit for purpose and making changes if needed. So thank you so much. And I think on that note, we'll probably start taking up some questions. And maybe I'll start with a question. Actually, there's some interest in this about metrics. When you're creating an intervention like this, how can one assess the success of a restructuring or putting the new structure together? I know, Eva, you've mentioned the metrics. Actually, all three of you mentioned in some way or the other. And we've talked about data. So would love to have your thoughts on how can one actually assess the success of these interventions, especially when it comes to persuading our colleagues that this is working. So
maybe I'll do a quick start. Yeah. So this is actually a really good point because, as I mentioned, we have this paid for service. So we weren't sure whether the researchers would be willing to buy into the service. And actually, one metric for us has been mostly qualitative. It's been the feedback that we've got. So it's not necessarily the figures that we have, although we do have a nice portfolio of projects now, but it's more the feedback from the researchers where we have really understood, oh yes, this is a service that's really needed, and we've fed that feedback back from the researchers to the management to really show that this is an advantageous service and that the researchers really need it.
Daniela?
So, yep.
Oh, Eva, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I could just say from the very, very beginning, from like when starting a grants office, where you might have researchers that submit their applications on their own. You don't know how many applications that goes in from your university or institute. I think that was one of our struggles. what we did was to at least measure the ones that we did know going in, and how the ones that had received our support, if they were successful or not, you know. But I think that's a challenge in itself, to create something. I mean, we're lucky nowadays at King's we have a new system called WorkTribe, but to create something where you can actually have an oversight of all the applications going in, that will really measure your success. But in the meantime, you just got to do what you can do, and measure the ones that you helped with or are aware of.
Thank you, Eva.
I think maybe from my side, on top of metrics, maybe I'll talk a bit also about KPIs, key performance indicators. So we do have now a system to measure exactly workload per staff for the whole institution, which is really important, success rate, and so on and so forth. But it's also important, I think, when we define pre-award, I hear, yeah.
If I can just interrupt, could I just request all the attendees to keep themselves on mute? I think somebody's mic is turned on. Go ahead, Daniela. Sorry about that.
No worries. No, I was saying, in terms of defining pre-award services, we did define performance expectations. So what is the quality of the work that we are meant to deliver? And thanks to the system we have in place, and thanks to all the work that my team has done, has been fantastic. We have really raised the bar. We are clear on what services we are supposed to deliver, the time frame, which is something that we can measure in the system, and also the different criteria in terms of quality. And we use them as, let's say, not really KPI, but performance expectations, because there are many reasons why sometimes things don't really go as supposed to. But it's really important to be aware of where is the end goal, where is the bar, and how we can get there, and how we can improve.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was wondering whether our attendees can unmute and ask their questions, turn on their videos. Probably that's disabled. Abdul, do you think that's possible to allow our participants to unmute themselves?
Yes, Dr. Savita. We have given them an access of their mic. They can speak.
Okay, okay. So maybe if I could just start, I mean, do we have Isha Goel here? Isha, I think at the point of registering, you had asked an interesting question. I was wondering if you'd like to read it out. I'm not sure the technology works. I'll read out Isha's question in that case. So Isha's question was, how can the process and research involved in technology transfers be made efficient and effective? And how much involvement of the grant office is best for this?
I don't know if Eva wants to say something, but I'll go with my experience. Let's put it this way. So the tech transfer office at King's is separate from the pre-award office. We do liaise and interact a lot at contractual stage. So when we negotiate with the funder, if it's needed, or with the collaborators, of course, it depends on the type of project. What pre-award does is to make sure that we have a framework for exploitation of our IP, and to have a clear governance in the project for taking decisions when the project starts developing IP or results that can then be developed. But we really work closely with the tech transfer to make sure that our, let's say, governance is fit for purpose, in terms of if at some point they want to apply for patents or they want to create spin out, to make sure that what we have negotiated up front does not impede or avoid any exploitation. But then we really leave it to the tech transfer office to work with the academic for the development and the exploitation of the result. That's our experience.
Okay.
Yes, and if I can just add to that too, I think it's important that there is training provided at an earlier stage in the researchers' careers, because it's entrepreneurial skills too, and not necessarily the old senior ones will have that or are interested in that, but the young researchers, postdocs, you know, they are very often the ones that could drive those ideas forward, and that might, you know, be willing to invest too in another way, you know. So I would say training at some point at the institution level, training of entrepreneurial skills, and also to have like entrepreneurial, some have entrepreneurial you know, units or supporting staff that supports with that. So yeah, capacity building, skill building.
Skill building, yeah. Chandrima, you've got a question. I was wondering if you could unmute yourself. In fact, you have a couple of questions, I think.
Hi, my name is Chandrima. I'm a grants manager at Indian Institute of Science. This is a very nascent office. It was started in February 2020. I just have a couple of questions. The first one I wanted to ask was about benchmarking that Dr. Eva had mentioned. And I just wanted to know, when you do a benchmarking for an office, how does one actually go about doing it? And what are the kind of key people whom you would want to get in touch for this benchmarking exercise? What kind of institutes would you want to refer to when you're doing a benchmarking? And what are the stages in which you would want to do this benchmarking for the office?
Great, that's a great question, really. Yeah, so if you're at the very beginning, again, you know, it's different from where you are in the process. You know, I just actually did a benchmarking with some peer universities now this past month in terms of post-award services. But if you're at the very beginning, I think how you go about it, I mean, there are different ways. There's a lot of information out there that you could just get through, you know, internet. But I always say that, you know, that should be combined with contacting those universities. And again, we're talking about, you know, you would gain from it later, because we're back to this networking and connecting with your peers, which is really good. So one thing doesn't exclude the other, if I may say so. I would first do my research on what is available and then contact them. And I would probably most likely, you know, first of all, establish a group that are about the same level as you. You know, where are they, and what, you know, what are they doing, and do they have grants? But also identify the ones that you want to become as, or want to strive, because, you know, that's the whole purpose. You want to or say improve in that sense. That's why you're doing it. Or that's actually a good question, because you should. What's the purpose of your benchmarking too? Of course. Right. So my last benchmarking that I did was to compare how many full-time equivalents my peers had compared to us in terms of post-award capacity. But it's completely different than from, you know, where do we want to be in terms of building a grants office and reaching targets and supporting an applications. So just a basic question: what do you want from the benchmarking? Then do your research, contact them, and it's so much fun. It's so much worth it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I had also another question. I mean, as a person who's kind of managing an office, I mean, there are many times when there's a pressure to don multiple hats, you know, as a manager. So I just wanted to know what are the key skills that one can work towards when you are in charge of a grants office?
Very good question. I'm going to jump in and say, you know, I think leadership is important. Again, you know, you as you're not necessarily a manager, you're a leader. You're supposed to set the vision, the strategy, the goals. You know, it's not, and I think that is very challenging. Coming from having worked hands-on, you know, is to take that step from going from hands-on to leadership. But leadership skill, I think, is number one, because you're the cheerleader in the sense. You're the one that's, you know, there are always going to be difficulties and challenges in every step on the way. But I mean, you are the one bringing in that energy, you know. the group. So just spontaneous, but I'm sure Daniela and Stephanie wants to come in there too.
Stephanie, I'll go. I think so. On top of what Eva said, I very much empathize with what you said, because despite the fact that I'm supposed to be leading a project, I'm in office, I'm still very much sometimes doing the applications myself, the contracts, the budgets. So I understand the multiple hats. I think flexibility in terms of, you know, when it's needed. If you need to do an application, you'll do an application. When it's needed, if you have to do a presentation in front of your rector or president, you do that. So it's about really being able to put yourself in front of different audience, understand what they need, what they want, and make sure that you target your service at that level. And I say something that, I mean, I don't know, applies to me, because I'm always someone who is very, or strives to be helpful for everyone and in every occasion. And I've learned with experience, sometimes you have to establish boundaries, and the power and the difficulty sometimes to say, no, I cannot do it now, I'll do it next week, or no, it doesn't fall within my remit. I'm not expert enough on that. Please go and find someone else or contact this other office and remit. Difficult to juggle, but important in terms of preserving mental health, the workload, and everything else.
Thank you so much.
Stephanie might have something more.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with the flexibility aspect, to remain flexible, and the boundaries. And then I would also add to keep your vision in mind for what you're going forward. This project management service, if we hadn't have kept pushing for it, it probably would have just been one of those ideas that just gets pushed under the rug. I had to really be reinforcing it and keeping the momentum going with the colleagues that I had, and really pushing it to get it off the ground. And it was worth it, because it is off the ground now. But it's something that if we weren't doing that, me and my colleague, and you know, I was very much, because I'm very passionate about this post award and this project management, if I wasn't doing that, it could have easily not have grown into what it is now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. It was a really amazing presentation for all the three of you. Really. Thanks so much. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chandrima. And just a reminder to everyone, do put your hand up if you'd like to ask a question, since we're now able to hear the voices. So I think Sonali Saha had a question some time back. Sonali, are you still with us? Would you like to ask something? And do we have Pooja Shanbag with us? Pooja, are you with us? Probably not.
I think Pooja Shanbag has left the meeting, Dr. Savita.
Left the meeting, yeah. All right, that's all right. And we had a question. So I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Remco van der Zouw. Are you still with us? All right, never mind. I think there might be some challenges with that. And maybe I'll just pick up some more questions that had come in. So there's a new research manager who had written in. Oh, I see. Can't unmute. All right. I'll in that case I'll read out your question. He had a question about pre-award, which is how do you convince the researchers at your institution to use your newly founded pre-award service? And
so
yeah, go ahead.
So before joining King's 10 years ago, I worked for a year at in a university here in London, completely different from King's. It was mainly teaching only university. So the focus was really not on research. And while I was the only, I was the grants office myself. So the, how do you say, there was not much focus or not much hype or interest from the academics to actually apply for research because they were mainly doing teaching. And the way I went about it was really slowly, step by step, not really trying to convince them, but try to understand from them, as I said during my presentation, what they needed, because everyone wants to find some money to do anything. Everyone wants to find a partner or a collaborator or some other experts in another country, another institution that they need maybe for, you know, publication purposes and so on and so forth. So I really started conversations first with the management team in the different faculties, but then with clear researchers and names that were a bit more active. And then once I established a trust and a connection with them, they started referring me also to other academics and to their peers. So it started this rippling effect, but it takes time. And I think what's important is really to highlight the benefits and the opportunities that you bring. And if you have some data, talking about data importance, that backs up, you know, your success, you can say, I've helped this other academic, he won a grant for the first time in his life, things like that. It speaks volume more than anything else. That was my experience.
Thank you, Daniela. So I have, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the word trust is very important here. I think if you can build up this level of trust with the researchers, that they know that you know what you're doing. This has been hard in the past for us to get academics to come to us. And it is unfortunately true once you have a track record, like Daniela says, once you have examples of where you have helped someone and it's been successful, it does help. But I think this slow building up of trust from the researchers was really, really important for us.
Thank you, Stephanie. And we have another question from, again, a very newly minted grant manager. He's at an institution with about 100 newly recruited faculty. And he looks forward to conducting grant writing workshops, webinars for the faculty. And he's wondering, is there any advice for that?
Stephanie, do you want to go first?
I've held grant writing workshops for the past 5 years at my institution. The advice I would give is that what we do, each grants office obviously is structured differently. In my grants office, we don't have scientific specialists in each field. We are all very generalist. So when I do proposal writing workshops, it's from a general point of view. And usually I would take I would sometimes even take a specific grant scheme that is a common, for example, a common fellowship scheme for early stage postdocs that they could apply for. And I would go through and give them proposal writing tips and go through the application form with them. And I think the importance is they should always rely on their peers, their scientific peers, to give the feedback on the scientific side of the proposal. But you are very well situated to see the other aspects, and whether with experience this comes once you've gone through a few calls and you can get access to the evaluation reports from the funders. This is fundamental. For me, this was a huge learning curve on how to advise people how to write grants, because you see trends in the evaluation reports from the peer reviewers. You see trends that researchers are really missing, and one of them for me when I was doing this at the beginning was risk management. None of the researchers knew how to write about a risk management strategy properly, so I said, okay, let me do that. Let me put that in my workshop and tell them this is how you do a risk management strategy. And you can do that for anything that's non-necessarily scientific. This could be your area of expertise, and it's really worked for me so far. And I really enjoy giving the proposal workshop. So if you need more tips, please contact me. I'll be happy to share them with you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That's lovely. Yeah.
If I can add, King's, it depends on the funders, but some funders, we have invited some funders in the past to give us presentation on specific schemes and calls. And that was really helpful because the researchers could hear from the funders directly what the funder was looking for. And that was helpful. And another tip is if you have a specific researcher or academic who is very successful, or someone who's won a grant in the past on a specific scheme, get them to deliver also the training or part of the training to their peers, because researchers talk the same basically language, and the experience that the researchers could pass on to others is very important in terms of what Stephanie would say, the non-technical, the non-scientific bit as well, and how to present it. And sometimes when funders go through peer review, they are the academics themselves that are doing peer reviews. So if you know that in your institution you have some researchers that act as peer reviewers for funders, get to understand from them what are the elements, the criteria that they look for when they peer review other people's projects. And then all these elements, you could use them in your training.
Great, thank you so much. So I think we'll probably take one or two final questions because it's been a long session. Stephanie, I think there's one question about what is the basis of costing research managers' salaries from overheads?
I always get this question when I talk about when I talk about the project management services. So we currently have an overhead policy at the University of Vienna where a portion of the overhead stays with the project. So the researcher can choose what happens with that overhead. So if the researcher decides that they want to have a project manager, then if they haven't got enough money in the direct cost of the budget, they could use some overheads for that. This is actually going to change sometime soon, and I know we're probably moving to a system which is which might be more common amongst other institutions where the researchers themselves don't keep the project overheads. So this is why now in most of the project management service that we do it at the pre-award. We cost ourselves in our pre-award. So yeah, it all depends on your institutional policy on overheads as to whether that would be allowed in your institute. So far for us it is, and in the future it probably won't be.
Thank you so much. So I think I'm going to bring this session to a close, although we could go on and on.
Yeah.
One final question to all of our lovely panelists today. What advice would you have to Indian research managers who are creating new offices or restructuring their offices and finding their feet?
I go first, and I think I'm going to have to go back to the one of the tips that I said during my presentation. It's networking. Network. Don't invent the wheel yourself necessarily. Contact your peers. We're all willing to share. The researchers are in competition, but we work together, the research administrators. So, contact any of us. And also, build other networks. But again, network. It's my number one tip.
Thank you so much, Eva. And I should say that I got to know Eva, Daniela, and Stephanie through IRMI. And that again is an example of networking, because we reached out, we connected, we discussed the webinar, and here we are today. So that's excellent advice. Thank you so much. Daniela, Stephanie, yes, Stephanie, go ahead.
Yeah, I would also mirror this comment on networking, and to take it back even further, I met Daniela through a network that we're part of, and this is a working group. So this would be my advice to Eva mentioned before how important it is to benchmark and look for institutions to benchmark that you want to be like. When I first started, I didn't really know how to benchmark or what I was doing, and I was in this this group of I was in a research support office working group where it was a very open atmosphere with all of the colleagues from different grants offices from different universities, and we just thought of topics that we wanted to discuss with each other. You know, once someone said, how do you retain staff in your research office? So then we did a big session on how to retain staff. And someone said, what services do you offer in your grants office? And we did a session on that. So it could even be worth, even on a national level, on an Indian level or subcontinent, you can come up, or you can find colleagues maybe through different events, through conferences that really do interests and presentations, or you have interests with, and create this working group for yourselves, because it's been instrumental in my career development and the development of this project award service. I mean, it's really opened up the ideas to me, and this is how I started my benchmarking. So even if these institutions weren't necessarily where I wanted to be, I could still see, okay, who does what and what is more common, and it was still a very good process and good experience for me. So I would recommend that.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I'd just like to say that through the IRMI initiative, we are planning to have some informal discussion sessions where we just have, an open session, and people can join in and set the agenda fairly flexibly. If we have any specific topics we want to discuss, we might bring that in. But I'm hoping that our research managers will use that as, a great platform for doing exactly what you're suggesting.
That sounds perfect, and it's all about the willingness and openness to share best practice, but also failures. Don't forget to share the failures, because we learn a lot from each other. I'm very excited that you're going to have that, because I think that sounds really good.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Daniela?
Yeah, apart from contact us, me directly also, if you want about pre-award, my email was there. I'd say also network with your researcher community, with your with your academics, because at the end of the day, we are here to offer a service to them, to the researchers. So we need to network with them, get to know them, understand what their struggles are, understand what their objectives are. And remember that we bring added value to them. So be proud of that and don't be shy. At the beginning, at least, of my career, I was always a bit hesitant to go and talk to these big professors, because they have no time for you. And oh my God, what do you want from me? But the way you can actually enhance their career, because if they win big grants, they're going to have a big career, and the way you can actually help them in achieving their objectives is really precious. So the grants office should be with the academics. It shouldn't be just a separate office hidden in in a building out there at the border of the campus. You work with your academics. You are your academics. That's my last tip.
Awesome. No, I think that's absolutely spot on. That's such good advice. So on that note, I'll say thank you so much to our incredible panelists, and of course, a huge thanks to all our research managers who've joined today. Thanks also to the India Alliance staff for having supported the webinar. Bye-bye then, everybody. Have a lovely rest of the day and weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.